After my mother passed away, Dad had an affair with her sister and then made an attempt to get me to move out. After a week, my dad came to the realization that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. I must get this off my chest, therefore this will be lengthy and intricate. I feel so alone, and I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing after all that has occurred to me in the past several months. At 17, I live with my father. Less than a year has elapsed since my mother's death. Before this, she had been ill for a very long period with cancer. Since I was 13 years old, I believe mother had been in and out of the hospital. Our family has had a difficult few years, and as my father was the only provider, I had to assume responsibility for my mother's care. It was generally just my mom and me, but occasionally her sister. My Aunt Edna, F38, would stop by and provide a hand. I gave it my all in taking care of her, and I wouldn't hesitate to do it again. I simply can't get over how much I miss her and how awful it feels to be without her. Even after all this time, I can't stop missing her. I never go to sleep without telling her about my day and having a conversation with her. Though everyone around me has moved on, I just can't seem to forget her. It seems like she didn't exist at times. My father is not in the same situation. I'm not sure why, but he's changed significantly. He moved on from mom in no time at all. He deleted all of her pictures, he doesn't discuss her, and he doesn't hold any of her keepsakes. Since I was a young child, I have witnessed them being incredibly in love. Therefore, I'm not sure why he feels this way. We were the only three there. There was an abundance of love and happiness in the house. All of it vanished abruptly once mom became ill. It felt like dad was waiting for her to pass away at the end. And I shouldn't be saying or feeling this, but by the end, he had gotten quite angry and unpleasant. He used to avoid being with her, and began to stay later at work. Thankfully, mom was too exhausted to notice that her own husband was neglecting her, even if it was awful to watch. Though I don't believe I did a very good job of it, I did my best to fill his shoes. My dad then took a step that no one could have predicted. A few weeks after his mother passed away, he began dating Aunt Edna. I don't believe I have ever felt so deceived and furious in my life, and I doubt I ever will. How could he get over it so fast? He had been married to mom for 20 years. How come it was so simple for him to just replace her with her own sister, and not just any other person? It was repulsive. My father informed me that while he did not anticipate my understanding at this time, it will come with age. For now, though, I just had to accept his choice. I told him I despised him and that I would never accept his decision to reconcile with the sister of his late wife. He remained silent when I questioned him about how it was so simple for him to move on so fast. He was defending himself by saying that I would eventually come to see his viewpoint, but I had a heated argument with him during which I called him all kinds of derogatory terms. I told him that I prayed I never turned into a man like him and that he was an abhorrent piece of garbage. Though I wanted to, I'm not sure if my words reached him. I wanted the anguish I was experiencing to reach him. Mom would have been hurt. If, few months after her death, she discovered what was going on, she would be inconsolable. Everyone was making me feel like the bad guy because I wasn't supportive of their relationship, even though it was ugly and repulsive. In an attempt to help me move on, Aunt Edna even made an effort to speak with me, telling me that I should be glad that this is occurring in the family. At that moment, I wanted to hit her. I informed her that I didn't have to move on from our separation. She was talking about my mother, and I would never get over her passing. I also explained to Aunt Edna that just because she had taken the position of mom in my dad's life, it did not mean she had to in mine as well. She informed me that her goal was to create a new family, rather than replace anybody. I informed her that I had no desire to start a new family. My mother and father were my family, and I did not want to be a part of this new family, if he had chosen to start a new one with her so quickly, and at the expense of my mother's memories. They both made several attempts to persuade me, but I remained unmoved. I used to hide myself in my room all the time and just come out to eat or go to school because it became so horrible. My father tried to communicate to me, but I ignored him every time, and eventually he gave up. Thus, it appeared as though we were stuck in the home. We stayed to ourselves and didn't say anything to one another. I know my father was hoping I would give in so he could coerce me into embracing their connection, but I refused to back down since it was poisonous and oppressive. This could not be permitted by me. And I'm aware that he didn't require my approval to take any action. But I was aware that I could never, especially at this early stage, accept something like this. I was totally taken aback by him, since I had assumed that this was the lowest he could go. My aunt and my father's new girlfriend moved into the house about a month and a half ago. By then, things between my dad and I had not become normal. I received no warning and he did not disclose to me what he was doing. One morning I woke up to a lot of noise and noticed Aunt Edna carrying boxes and luggage. I asked her what was going on, but she hurried to her room without responding. When I went to question my father about what was going on in the house, all he could say was, "Oh, so now you talk to me. I knew I couldn't strike him there. even though I really wanted to. It was disgusting. Even though I was aware of what was going on, I refused to accept it. This evil woman was not content with simply seducing her mother's husband. She had to take control of her memories and her home now. From that point on, I felt as though someone was strangling me every single second in the house. Being near them was unbearable for me. I'd stealthily moved most of my mother's boxes into my room. That was the only comfort I had. I was aware that Aunt Edna would dispose of Mom's belongings as soon as she got her hands on them, if given the opportunity. She also attempted to accomplish it. Dad often replied that I had Mom's belongings in my room when she questioned where they were stored. She has repeatedly attempted to enter my room under various pretenses, but I just won't let her in. She is in no way acceptable in the same room as my mother. I lock my room even when I go for school to prevent her from entering and tampering with my belongings. All I want is to be able to get out of here. 2 weeks ago, everything changed when Rachel, F19, Edna's daughter, returned home. As of the now, Rachel and I get along really well. We grew up spending a lot of time together because our ages are close. I felt as though I actually had a sibling. However, once Mom became ill, I was mostly responsible for taking care of her, which caused Rachel and I to drift apart. Though we weren't as tight as we once were, we did stay in touch. Additionally, 2 weeks earlier, Edna brought Rachel into the home. I was relieved to see her because I thought I would finally have someone to talk to. But my father informed me that I would have to spend a few days staying at a friend's house while they worked out a solution since there wasn't enough room in the house for 4 people. I gave him a shocked expression. I questioned him why he'd let Rachel come here if there wasn't actually room in the home for 4 people, which there never truly was. He remarked that we owed it to Rachel as family to support her because she was in difficulties. I claimed that, like my mother, I was a member of his family. He sent us off without a second's hesitation, and Edna effortlessly into his life. He remained silent about it, but warned me that if I didn't stop being tough and make concessions, he would have to take action. To be quite honest, I'm no longer surprised by anything this man does. He has descended to such abhorrent depths that I now anticipate him being a repulsive piece of garbage, whatever. I had no self-consciousness issues. In fact, I could have crashed at a few friends' houses. My concern was about my mother's belongings. I was aware that Edna would attempt to take action once I was gone, and it would be beyond my power to stop. Furthermore, my dad doesn't give a damn about me or his late wife enough to stop Aunt Edna. I just stayed behind since I was so anxious about my mother's belongings. I walked to my room and shut the door. A few hours later, Edna was hammering on the door, pleading for me to come out so we could talk, but I simply ignored her. That day, I didn't come out of my room. I was becoming more and more paranoid, and I was frightened about what may occur. The following morning, I got up very early, locked my room, and walked downstairs to get something. To my complete surprise, Dad was apparently waiting for me by sleeping on the sofa. He stood up as soon as he heard me and said he wanted to talk to me. I told him I didn't want to talk to him. He got in the middle of my attempt to quickly rush back upstairs and retrieve something from the refrigerator. I made an effort to go by him, but I couldn't. He was quite clear in telling me that they could no longer accommodate me, and that I had 1 week to go, and that he would just stop doing it because he was picking Rachel over me, and that I was an annoying, ungrateful child who had no appreciation for what he was doing for me. He informed me that the most kind thing he could do for me was to send me some money to cover my living bills, but that I had to move out to make space for his new family. Tears were streaming from my eyes. This individual is not even familiar to me. Before I understood, my other dad did not even consider me to be his kid. I believed I had only lost one parent. To him, I was merely a human, or more accurately, a burden that he could ignore whenever he pleased. And I was aware of my helplessness in his presence. There was nothing I could do. Ultimately, this was his home, he was feeding and caring for me, and he owed me nothing, so I had to pay attention to what he had to say. He could just decide to stop helping me whenever he wanted to, and I had to accept it. He can also use the fact that I will shortly turn 18 as his justification. He is ready to shelter and support a 19-year-old Rachel, but not his own kid. So I know it's bias and hypocrisy. I have no idea what has happened to him. Perhaps he was always this self-centered and repulsive person, and to truly see him for who he is, disaster and pain were necessary. I walked back to my room and sobbed uncontrollably, not saying a word. My own living parent was leaving me, and even after all he'd been doing to me over the past few months, it still stung. Even though we hadn't been communicating and I was starting to feel that maybe I didn't important to him, I continued to dream that one day things would go back to normal and we could resume our relationship as father and son. That is obviously never going to occur, and I feel foolish for thinking it was ever possible. He didn't care what happened to me and didn't love me. He could not care less about everything else as long as he could be with Aunt Edna. I had no idea where I would go or store all of my mother's belongings. I couldn't part with any of my mother's belongings, even if I was ready to keep just 2 sets of clothes for myself. I can never let them go since they are the only remnants of her that I have left. After a few of hours, there was a knock on the door. It was Rachel on the other end, and I did not want to open it. She stated I should talk to Grandpa and that she wanted to assist grandparents, my mother's, as quickly as possible. Then she secreted a note behind my door. To tell the truth, I didn't think much of her. Although I knew she was a lovely person, we hadn't really communicated or bonded in years. Since she was ultimately her mother's daughter, her allegiance was to her mother above all others. I was thus rather dubious. Except I had no other choice except to speak with my grandfather. Really, how much worse could things get than it was right now? My grandfather, who resides in a distant state, was phoned. I began sobbing over the phone as soon as I heard his voice. I answered his question about what was wrong by managing to put together a few intelligible lines. It took me a while to explain everything to him, and I also informed him that Rachel had requested that I get in touch with him. He expressed his happiness at hearing from me and mentioned that, for a few months, he had been pleading with my dad to get me to speak with him. But my dad had been insisting that I had no interest in doing so. He had wanted to call me, but my dad had never given him my number, and he had misplaced his phone, along with all his contacts. He assured me that I didn't need to worry and that he would handle everything. He promised to stay in touch and that I need not worry about anything. But until he arrives, I had to make sure that I remained in the house and did not move out. He said he would be flying down to my city as soon as possible. I had to be extremely cautious and not disclose this information to anybody. He promised to try to make it here by next week and to let me know if he couldn't. After chatting to him, I felt both relieved and afraid, and he made it clear that I wasn't supposed to leave the home until he arrived. Feeling light and relieved to be able to talk to an adult, as well as knowing that he will take action to either get me out or make my father understand. I simply want the privilege of temporarily returning to my childhood since I have been an adult for a very long period. I was scared since I had no idea what would happen at this point. Even though grandfather has always been a cheerful person, it felt quite serious. Though I am aware that he lost his daughter, I don't think he will defend me in front of his other daughter. Right now, everything seems to be in disarray, and all I can do is wait it out. All I can do is wait for him to arrive and pull me out of this disaster that I've made of my life. First update, things have changed drastically since then. It all makes perfect sense now. Until grandfather showed up and started taking care of things, I didn't understand why dad was acting the way he was. Now that I know, though, I understand. A week ago, grandpa asked to meet with me. He texted me the hotel's location where he was staying. He promised to bring a car and urged me to gather up whatever my mother had. Rachel was at work. When I packed my belongings and my mother's out and notified my father and Aunt Edna that I was going. When I got to my grandfather's hotel room with everything in it, he began searching through everything for something. At last, he discovered what he was searching for: a document, but not just any paper. They were the documents pertaining to the home we presently occupy. Then, he explained to me what was actually going on. Grandpa gave Rachel and I houses as gifts when we were born. They are ostentatious, I know, but I learned he's wealthy. He expressed his desire to assist us in some way. And Dad purchased us houses entirely, rather than putting up money for education. Right now, the house we've lived in my whole life is the one that should legally be mine. But the problem was that, Rachel and I being minors, the home was, for want of a better term, legally under our mother's supervision until we were 18. I didn't know about this, and I don't blame my mother at all. I know she was unwell, so she could have forgotten about it. It's a whole other question why Dad didn't say anything to me. In any case, we were meant to receive the residences at reaching the age of 18. A few months after turning 18, Rachel's residence was officially transferred into her name a year ago. Aunt Edna and Rachel had been residing in the same home. The problem with my house was that, because my mother had died before I reached 18, my father, my other guardian, would temporarily own it until I did. That's what the initial plan was. Furthermore, Grandpa believes that Aunt Edna and Dad are plotting to either steal the documents before I reach 18 and prevent me from taking legal action, or they are conspiring together to have the home officially changed into their names. Grandpa says this is another reason why Dad never told me about the home. Now everything becomes clear. Why Dad has been distant, why Aunt Edna has shown up out of the blue, and why they continued attempting to go through Mom's belongings. When I questioned my grandfather about Rachel's home, he said that she had ejected her mother from the house as soon as she discovered what her mother was up to. Mother and daughter had a severe gap as a result, and they haven't been able to get along for a few years. That struck me as odd since, if that were the case, why had she moved in with us? According to Grandpa, Rachel was more anxious about Aunt Edna moving in with Dad than she was about me. Grandpa and her had been in regular communication, and they had both determined that I needed to be moved out and that I needed to know the whole truth. She had returned home for that reason, but no one had suspected her, and Aunt Edna assumed she was attempting to make apologies. With a few months left before turning 18, I asked my grandfather what we could do. Grandpa then revealed to me that throughout her illness, Mom had started to think that Dad had plans for the home. She suspected that her father was having an affair as well, but she was unaware of who it may have been. I believe it had always been Aunt Edna. At that point, she gave her grandfather a call and requested him to come over and help her modify the house's guardianship information. Until I reach 18, my dad is not the house's official custodian. Without his awareness, Mom had. Grandpa was designated as the caregiver when the document's language was altered. That was the paper he sought, and my father was unaware that such a document even existed. He doesn't have guardianship over the house, thus all of his attempts to seize control of it are pointless. Even though this isn't the legalese for it, this is how my grandfather conveyed it to me, and I think I understand it. In other words, Dad basically no longer has a right to be in the house, and my grandfather will enforce that. He informed me that he had made the decision to reside in the house with me till I became 18. And he will eject Dad and Aunt Edna because he is currently the guardian. When he stated that, I became afraid. To be honest, I wouldn't know what to do with that sort of power. I couldn't believe I had it over my dad. I don't want to become involved in legal matters because I am still a young child who lost his mother and comes from a difficult household. Grandpa has the reins now, and I'm just going to follow his instructions. Whatever has been going on has worn me out too much, and all I want is some quiet. Grandpa assured me not to worry and I would follow his instructions. I simply hope that these problems go away on their own, because I don't believe I can handle much more drama or pain. I simply want to be let go because I am utterly broken. Update 2. We spoke with Aunt Edna and Dad. They paled when they saw me and Grandpa together. Dad started to object as Grandpa waltzed into the home, but he quickly silenced him. He was accompanied by his attorney, and it was evident to me that both Dad and Aunt Edna were apprehensive. Grandpa wasted no time in appointing Dad as the property's caretaker for the ensuing several months, and he was giving Dad a month's notice to depart the house since he wanted to move here. After some heated comments were exchanged, my dad stood up and began shouting at Grandpa, telling him he had no legal standing. My dad's mouth dropped as his grandfather gave him the new documents, the ones that Mom had created behind his back. Grandpa replied that Mom had the right to replace the nomination at any time and that she had done so. He said that this was a fake and that he didn't believe it. Dad was essentially forced to accept it. Dad and Aunt Edna were both in shock that this had actually happened. Rachel chuckled. She came to my side and gave me a hug for the first time, and it really appeared like she was enjoying the whole outburst. Thanking her for everything she had done for me, I gave her a hug in return. Aunt Edna pulled Rachel's arm and gave her a hard smack across the face after noticing that Rachel had gone around her back to assist me. Rachel now has a cut on her face from the force with which she struck her, and the fierce young woman that she is. She simply broke into a smile and announced that she would be filing charges, and Edna broke down in sobs on the ground. I could see the anger in Rachel's eyes as she continued to insist that she couldn't do anything like this since she was her daughter. Edna will not be getting away with it from her. Dad recognized that he and his young sweetheart were on the wrong side of what was turning into a big shit show. This is where he begins to apologize. Grandpa stopped him when he attempted to pull me aside and talk to me. He added that because he had made it quite evident that Aunt Edna was the object of his loyalty and not me, there was no need for us to speak now. Dad responded that Grandfather had no right to get involved because this was a matter between father and son. I informed my father that I didn't want to talk to him, and that Grandpa had every right to intervene. There's nothing he could say to me right now that would change this. At last, all of the suppressed rage was released. I told him what I truly thought of him and called him every name in the book. I informed him that he was a failure as a guy because he was a bad spouse and father. I claimed he had the opportunity to put things right and allow us to reunite as a family, but he was too self-centered and avaricious to ever care about anything that might lessen the suffering of others. I was so out of control of myself at the time that I can't even recall half of what I said. I paused, and there was silence. After showing me to my room, Rachel just sat with me for a while. My sister and my grandfather are the two people that I am most appreciative of having watching out for me. Without them being here with me, I don't know what I would be doing right now. I have no idea what will occur next. However, I do know that I won't be fighting this war by myself anymore. Now that I have support, I understand that I am not in the wrong for rejecting my father's behavior toward me and his blatant disdain for my mother's memory. Update 3. This is going to be my last update. I hate to break the news to everyone who is expecting a dramatic, tearful reunion between a father and son, but none of that has occurred. Aunt Edna was charged by Rachel. Edna attempted every tactic in the book to dissuade Rachel, but she is uncompromising in her stubbornness. Dad had 1 month to get out after Grandpa moved in. He has been attempting to speak with me one-on-one, but I turn him down every time. Not only that, but my dad is terrified of my grandfather, who is maintaining vigil, so he's not doing anything again. Everything our mother had given us back. I still have it carefully stored in my room, and once Dad passes away, I intend to put it back there. I don't need the whole home to myself, so I'll shut Mom's room. Many of you recommended that I seek therapy in order to process all that has occurred. Grandpa has given me money to obtain therapy even though he doesn't believe in these things, despite my suggestion that he do the same. Every day Rachel comes over to keep me company. Even though I detest the distance that separates us, I know that Mom has always had my best interests in mind. She has assured me that we can always hang out and that she will help me locate a decent therapist. Despite the unsatisfactory update, it appears that everything will eventually work itself out. Even if my dad doesn't feel regret right now, I don't think I'll ever speak to him again. There has been a breach of trust. Nothing on earth can restore it to its previous state. Many thanks for your assistance, Reddit.